Hello and welcome. As you may know, Dune is coming to theaters very soon. In fact, it has already been released in some territories, and here in Poland we have to wait until mid-October, unfortunately. Similar case for the USA and China. And I figured this might be a good time to make a sort of video essay explaining why I think this is one of the most exciting movies of the last decade. And in fact, if Avengers Endgame didn't exist, I would be confident in calling Dune my most anticipated film of the last 10 years. In this video, I'll try to explain why exactly I'm so pumped for it and hopefully make it interesting for you as well. So get yourself a good drink, get comfortable and enjoy. Since Dune, the film, is an adaptation of a novel, we have to start by talking about that novel. Here's how the Polish edition looks like. The book was written by Frank Herbert. As you can see, it's pretty damn dense. It's over 600 pages, contains like appendixes at the end, a small dictionary and so on. It was first released in 1965 and later followed by a whole series that expanded upon its world, characters and ideas. Herbert ended up writing 6 books, which were structured into the first trilogy. Then the 4th book was meant to serve as a bridge, and then a second trilogy. If you count right, that second trilogy was never actually finished. The last book remained unwritten because of Herbert's untimely death. Later on, his son, along with some other people, continued writing further books in the universe, but I have never touched any of them ever, and every single mention of them in any conversation that I've seen was with one single advice tagged on: stay away from them. Apparently they're awful and they tarnish the legacy of the originals. So I've read the original 6, and while recommending the entire series depends on your individual taste of sci-fi and philosophical books, I think that the first one at least is required reading for everyone because of how important it is in the history of science fiction and, more generally speaking, of literature as a whole. You can make an argument that what Lord of the Rings was to fantasy, Dune was to science fiction. In some ways that's true because it's a classic of the genre and one of its best works. But what's interesting to me is the contrasting way in which each of those works stands in its genre. See, with Lord of the Rings, if you think about it, it basically set a template for a generic fantasy world. So many other works had medieval-inspired sword and sorcery worlds with humans, dwarves, elves, orcs and dragons, and each of those races displaying specific traits of character that Tolkien made canon. So much of what Lord of the Rings established was later just mindlessly copied. With Dune it's different. While it influenced a lot of stuff as well, the way in which it did so is way more subtle, because there really is no other sci-fi work that you can put next to Dune and compare it directly. It is utterly unique in the way it creates its world and merges so many adult themes. Politics, religion, philosophy, messianism, myth creation, ecology, economics, drugs, shared consciousness, cult of personality, nature of war. All of those things can be found here in the story of Paul Atreides, the heir of a noble house that gets maneuvered into accepting the rule over the planet Arrakis, the so-called Dune. The planet is a barren wasteland. It's a desert planet with very few sources of water or vegetation, an almost uninhabitable world which requires people to completely flip the way they think and behave and live. But the planet is also strategically important. It is the only source of the spice called melange, which is a drug that expands consciousness of people that take it. It allows people to live longer lives as well, but crucially, it is also the only substance in this world which allows spaceship navigators to safely pilot their ships at high speed across the cosmos. Soon after the Atreides family arrives on Dune, they spring a trap set by its previous ruler, Baron Harkonnen. Paul ends up on a desperate quest for survival, but he may find unexpected allies on the planet due to how he fits into the local myths of a coming prophet, of a coming messiah. So again, the book is incredible, but many people have considered it to be unfilmable. First of all, because of the scale of spectacle required to put all of this on the screen, but perhaps even more so due to the nature of the writing. The novel is insanely dense. It treats its readers with respect, which means a lot of the responsibility is on you to follow what's going on. And a ton of things are only happening as inner monologues of the characters. So as a result, a great many people have looked at the book over the years and said, no, it's not possible to bring this thing to the big screen. But many doesn't equal all, and there have already been 2 attempts at filming Dune. In 1973, Alejandro Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain was released. Like the previous works of the director, it was incredibly weird, very surrealist, filled with trippy imagery, playing with the ideas of traditional narrative and what could or couldn't be done in film. It was an oddity, but more importantly, it was also successful. The happy producers told Jodorowsky he can do whatever he wants as his next project. He said, I want to make Dune, despite having never actually read the book, if you can believe it. The producers inexplicably said yes. They got the rights, Jodorowsky wrote a script, which of course deviated strongly from the book, and then he began gathering his collaborators, which was a list in itself. It included artists Moebius and H.R. Giger, who went to make concept art for movies like Alien, the band Pink Floyd, which agreed to score the film, and the cast, which included Jodorowsky's own son, Salvador Dali, Orson Welles, David Carradine, and Mick Jagger. If all of this sounds completely insane, you're about right. Jodorowsky said that his intention with the film was to replicate the sensation of being on LSD. He didn't much care about the source material, he had his own unique vision and he was on his way to deliver it. Until the storyboards were delivered to the Hollywood executives, who said, we will not finance this. The project was stopped, nobody actually wanted to make it, the film was dubbed too French, too dissimilar from what Hollywood usually liked to make, especially as it required a large budget. Would it have been a good adaptation if it was made? Probably not. Would it have been a good film on its own? Who knows? But would it have been utterly crazy and unique and worth seeing? No doubt about that from my side. In any case, while the film ended up not being made at that time, the storyboards still exist, and after circulating Hollywood, they have influenced many other works in the sci-fi genre, including the aforementioned Alien, Star Wars, Blade Runner, Prometheus, even Raiders of the Lost Ark. The whole story of this affair has recently been made into a documentary feature titled Jodorowsky's Dune, which I wholly recommend checking out. In any case, the first attempt at filming Dune ended up in a failure. After the failure of Jodorowsky, the rights to the film were moved around again until Hollywood decided to try once again to adapt the film in the early 1980s. David Lynch was selected as the director, once again someone weird, someone unusual, someone who has a touch of his own. This time around the film did end up being made, but it was a critical failure, and even Lynch himself has distanced himself from the film, publicly stating that out of his entire filmography, of all his projects, this is the one thing which he is dissatisfied with. A large part of the reason why was the studio mishandling the property. First of all, they insisted on keeping the runtime down, which ended up as the entire novel being condensed down to just 2 hours 17 minutes. That is very little considering how dense the book is, and you can see that the story suffered for it. There are also many shortcuts and changes from the book, a few very notable changes, including the ending, which basically reversed the message of the novel. But there were also other problems, including some weird casting choices, questionable special effects, and so on. We will probably never know to what extent that was on the studio and to what on Lynch himself, but I would choose to believe David in this case. He's not really a person who would be ashamed of his own art if he was the one responsible for it. So the fact that he spoke out against the film so publicly tells me that his creative input may have been limited. In any case, the Lynch version is undoubtedly a failed experiment as well, and for fans of the book, it really is nothing more than a disappointment. With Lynch's failure, Dune was left untouched for decades, with one exception. A miniseries was made for television in the year 2000. I have never seen it myself, so I can't talk about it in detail. From what I've read, it was pretty faithful to the book, but partly because of this, it wasn't a spectacular adaptation, because it didn't try to really adapt the material to the different medium, and it ended up with problems regarding pacing and exposition. Things that worked in the book didn't necessarily work in the TV series. In any case, I wanted to focus on cinema and not TV here, so back to the topic. In the meantime, the film industry moved forward, most notably in terms of technical possibilities. That made it possible to start adapting other successful book series like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, and then the success of those spawned the next ones like Hunger Games or Game of Thrones into the prestige TV show. So I think it was only a matter of time before someone came along and attempted to tackle Dune once again. And normally I would be quite pessimistic about it, but in this case I really am not. Quite the opposite. There are multiple reasons for that, and I'll actually leave the most important one for last, for the end, starting with the other significant ones. First of all, look at that cast. Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Jason Momoa, Stellan Skarsgård, Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem, Dave Bautista, David Dastmalchian, Zendaya, and more. Not only is it a great ensemble of really talented actors and actresses, but even more crucially, pretty much everybody fits the role they are playing. I look at Chalamet and I think, yeah, he is Paul Atreides. I see Jason Momoa in the trailer and I think, yep, that is Duncan Idaho. I see Javier Bardem as Stilgar and I instantly know who he's supposed to be. The entire main lineup is basically perfectly cast, which shows that the producers cared not just about star power, even though there is plenty of that, but also about the people actually matching their characters. Then there's the technical aspects of the film. The cinematographer is Greg Fraser, whose works include Foxcatcher and Vice, so smaller but interestingly looking films, but also Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and a couple of episodes of The Mandalorian, which all look spectacular and show that he can handle the grandiose scope of Arrakis that needs to be correctly shot and shown on screen. I mean, with works like Dune, we really need to fill the size of this world, the scope of the spectacle, and we can already see optimistic signs of that in the trailers. And then we have the score, which was written by Hans Zimmer. A couple of tracks are already available on YouTube and Spotify, and I know some people at this point say, yeah, he's good historically, but he's become a factory and doesn't have that same individual drive anymore, that passion. Well, in this case, he was actually such a fan of the book that he chose not to score Tenet for Christopher Nolan just so he could do Dune. And these two have been collaborators for decades now. And not only that, Zimmer actually said that apart from the official score album, he will be releasing not one, but 2 additional albums filled with music inspired by Dune that he wrote specifically because he just got so into it. Now, if you have one of the most accomplished film composers ever display so much passion that he records 3 different albums for your film, that's a great sign for me as well. Now, all these people are great, but at the end of the day, they are pieces on the board. They are tools in the hands of the director, and the director is my main reason for being so damn excited about this film. Denis Villeneuve is a Canadian director who over the past 2 decades has become one of my favorite filmmakers currently working. I have seen all of his movies since Polytechnique and have been impressed with every single one of them, and crucially for many different reasons. Polytechnique and Incendies were small personal dramas that were riveting with their stories and emotional impacts that they created. Prisoners showed me that Denis can get fantastic performances out of his actors and create a really tense thriller atmosphere. Enemy was proof that he can venture into the abstract, that he's not afraid of playing with unusual ideas and imagery. Sicario was a film from which I actually learned a whole lot about filmmaking and story structure, specifically because of how perfectly this film executes the storytelling device that of an audience insert character. And Arrival left me speechless in the movie theater, emotionally stunned, and to this day I remember slowly walking back home during a snowy evening, still thinking, still processing what I just saw. And then I heard the news that he was making Blade Runner 2049, and my first reaction was, get out. This is a cash grab, it cannot be good, it will only tarnish the legacy of the original, it's unnecessary, and I don't want it to be made. Sure, Arrival showed that Denis was fantastic at this cerebral, intellectual type of sci-fi, but even so, this was too much. I mean, it's Blade Runner, you don't touch that. And then as more and more details from production came out, eventually the trailer, I slowly became cautiously interested. And I remember thinking to myself, I will give it a chance. And if Denis manages to pull this one off, if 2049 is actually a good movie, I guess I'll never doubt him again. I will trust any and all of his future projects, because this is such a titanic task. If he manages to succeed, he's got my vote. And he knocked it out of the park. I ended up seeing 2049 twice, I think, in theaters, and then one more time at home. And it exceeded my expectations, or rather, it exceeded any expectations I may have had if I hadn't been so worried about it. It was a magnificent film, delivering on every promise, and I really think you can make a solid argument that it is better than the original. It's certainly a worthy sequel that understands what worked about the first film, but doesn't mindlessly copy everything, doesn't tap into the nostalgia. It uses some elements, adds some new ones, and manages to continue the philosophical discussion of the original in a really smart way. So then Dune was announced, and once again my initial thought was, oh no. But upon seeing Denis attached to it, I immediately stopped worrying. His previous output is enough for me to have full trust. But even if it wasn't, he has already shown through his words and actions that he's approaching Dune with proper respect. First of all, he himself said that he was a massive fan of the book since his childhood, and it was his dream to one day adapt it to screen. So for him it's a passion project, it's not just the next job that he took for the money. And secondly, from interviews, it really seems like he understands Dune. He knows what was it about that book that made it such a classic, and which elements he absolutely needs to keep when moving it to the screen. He also seems to understand the scope of the novel, which is why he made the decision to split the movie adaptation into two parts. The first film is just the first half of the first book, to ensure that not too much gets lost in translation. And the original plan was to go the same route as Lord of the Rings did, which was to shoot both movies back to back, or in that case 3 movies. But unfortunately the studio didn't agree. See, despite Blade Runner 2049 being a massive critical success, it ended up not making a lot of money. So this time around, Warner Brothers opted to wait. If the financial results are great, they will greenlight the second part of this film, and perhaps the sequels adapting the next books. If not, however, it's entirely possible we will never get a sequel, and the story will remain unfinished. So, as a massive fan of the novel, and someone who is very optimistic about this film adaptation, I urge all of you to go to the movie theater and check it out. It really has the potential to be the Lord of the Rings of the world, of the sci-fi cinema world. A series that we will revisit time and again and go back to in the years to come, and then compare other works to it. But whether that series gets made and we have anything to go back to apart from the first half is entirely up to us. So let's vote with our wallets, shall we? Let's show the producers that people don't only go to the theaters to see Marvel films and Fast and Furious these days. Show them that ambitious, cerebral, intelligent sci-fi is wanted just as much. And in exchange for the price of a theater ticket, I wholeheartedly believe that we'll all get a truly incredible experience.